Korea's contribution to esports is legendary, both within the scene and at this point in time, even further extended into something of the mainstream world. People are aware that Korea is the special place in esports history, from its roots in StarCraft Brood War in the early 2000s, to later on League of Legends, where eventually OGN Champions, LCK, to Overwatch with the early Apex tournaments, which were the best tournaments before the Overwatch League. It has been by far the best esports scene in the entire world. It's produced overall, on average, on aggregate, the best players in the history of esports. It has been a fully professional scene for over a decade, closing in on 2 decades at this point in time. It was featured heavily on 2 television channels in South Korea, again, going back almost 2 decades. It has been able to feature and have partnerships with mainstream sponsors long before Western esports was, such as Pringles, Coca-Cola, massive big name brands that we're talking about. In the same days as in the West, we were still just working with hardware sponsors, CPU processor producers, manufacturers of graphics card, peripherals. So one of the problems I have with this, though, is that it's always presented as Korean esports and the country of South Korea and what Koreans are all about. But if you actually look into the situation in Korea, it's a misnomer to call it Korean esports, except for the fact that Korean people take place in it. Because it's not about Korea, it's actually about Seoul, the capital city of Korea. It's basically Seoul esports. And actually, when you consider what has been accomplished and the level it's gotten to, that actually makes it even more special, even more of an outlier, and thus so unique that I think it needs to be studied as a phenomenon of one major city to understand how it spread, what happened there, and if any of those lessons can be learned and transitioned to somewhere in the West. Not an entire country, not an entire continent, one city in one country with a decent sized population. Because practically all of esports in South Korea takes place in Seoul, the capital city, which is, I think, a hidden advantage or contains hidden advantages on almost every single level of its infrastructure, how it's actually been able to flourish, how it's been able to produce so many great players in so many different games consistently and for so long overall. Because, as I said, since it all takes place in Seoul, everyone who is competing in Korean esports, effectively, is in a single place. They're all in Seoul, the capital city. That means that when someone wants to get involved in esports, they move to Seoul, whether that's a young player who's a trainee, gets a trial at a team and comes in for that, then gets a place as a training partner, so he moves to Seoul, or it's a massive metropolis, they already live in Seoul as it is. Having everyone in one place is, I think, one of the key components that is missed in the West that we've never had from a grassroots level up. And as a result, we've been trying to impose esports from a top level down, at least in the big business era, and we've missed it. We've got a disconnect between the old days of the LAN parties and the top-down global esports scene that can go anywhere, but also picks up its roots instantly and moves elsewhere. Whereas Korea, Seoul, has these deep-seated roots that have been so important. Because this is a metropolis, a true metropolis. Everyone's seen the big neon lights like Tokyo, etc. But this is the key thing to understand here. So using population stats from 2015, so only 3 years ago, Korea at the time had a population of 50.01 million people in its populace. Now, within those 50.01 million, Seoul accounted for almost 10 million. It was 9,860,000 people, roughly. Now, to put that in context, online, I found from a similar time period, New York City, big metropolis in North America, United States of America, that contained only 8.517 million people. So over 1 million less people living in New York City, which you already think of as a place that's like, it's too full, there's too many people, the traffic, it's so much business and fashion and media going on there. Seoul is bigger, has more people there. That means when you have everyone there, that the logistics of organizing things become infinitely easier, infinitely simpler, infinitely cheaper. You're not paying for all this travel. You're not having to organize a bunch of people all coming from disparate locations to one place. Everyone naturally to get into the industry is coming to one place in the first place. akin to something like Hollywood. And we see how Hollywood is absolutely unique in the world. There's nowhere comparable to Hollywood and its influence on the world in the cinema and the movie world, and how, because they have everyone in one city, they're able to do so much so quickly and at such a high level. It's like that with Korean esports, because when you have all the people in one place, think about how all these logistics then fall in line. So when you have games and you have these leagues and tournaments like the OSLs and MSLs in StarCraft, like the GSL in StarCraft 2, like LCK and OGN Champions in League of Legends, like Apex in Overwatch and now Contenders. When you have all these leagues taking place, they have arenas, stadiums and studios for all of these games from the leagues and the tournaments to be played in. So one aspect, and this is a very underrated aspect, and one reason I think that Korea always has an advantage in production of television shows and tournaments, is they have a controlled environment. If you were playing in the LCK, you go to the same stadium every week, you play your games in the same booths every week, the fans come to the same place every week, the equipment, all the TV cameras, all the microphones, all the lighting is already set up, it's already left there, it's already in prime position, it's going to be in the same position every single week. That makes your logistics for setting up and carrying out a production of an esports event so much better. Now, yes, in the Western esports, we've started to get events that take place in the same place again and again. ESL1 New York, ESL1 Cologne. But it's not the case that these are permanent places with routes set down. In fact, you have to bring your equipment every time. You have to set up again. You have to hire certain people. You have to bring your production people there. You have to bring the players there. The fans sometimes have to travel there and aren't coming locally. All of it's already in one place. And so there are less variables to be worrying about. Then you also, because you're always in the same place, you're always at a regular time interval, people are getting a sense for how to come to the games, when they're going to be on, what they're going to get from the experience. You get a regular audience in a way that you simply do not get in the West. Sure, you could say in LCS, perhaps they have something of a regular audience. I'll admit that. But that's even a fairly unique thing in the West, considering how many countries and continents we're talking about in the West. And especially in terms of, that's just one league. There isn't the same level and history following it as they have in Seoul with the OSL, with the LCK, with OGN, Apex, etc. Then, because you're all in one metropolis, the connectivity is about as good as you can get. That's why you hear these stories of Koreans playing on 5 or 9 ping. That's not just because you're in a LAN cafe with an amazing internet backbone that you're on. That's not just because you're playing within one country, etc. Whereas, someone who's living in the Midwest in America has to connect to a server in this case, it might be Chicago, but then someone in LA has to connect to Chicago as well, because that's where the main server is. No, the server's in Seoul, the players are in Seoul, the fans are in Seoul, everyone's in Seoul, so everyone has a flawless internet connection and ping. Yes, internet connectivity generally and speed and cost of connections is much, much better there. But even beyond that, if you have the best connection and you live in LA, you cannot get a ping comparable to the NA server if you play in North America. So having that low ping obviously makes for a better training environment. Now people are practicing on basically LAN conditions, almost no ping or negligible ping. They can do actions as fast as possible, anticipate people as fast as possible, train their muscle memory as fast as possible. In fact, ping just becomes a non-factor. That isn't the case in North America, never has been. That isn't the case generally for esports around the world, such as online leagues like ESL Pro League in Counter-Strike or Dota 2 qualifiers to even go to the international. Ping becomes a factor there that can mess up the sport, make it more difficult, you give certain advantages to certain people. Otherwise, this is a meritocracy in that sense. There's the equalizer that everyone's there with good connectivity. Then you've got to consider, because everyone's in one place, it's fabulous for media. Now, sure, South Korea's system and how controlling they are of their media, they're not a place with a very free media in contrast to certain other countries in the West, that are in the West rather. Sure, you might not see as much media, you might not see as much coverage, certain topics might not be probed as much due to the sort of political consensus there. But if you want to do interviews and if you want to go and work with a team and you want to write a story about a team, they're already in the same city as you. You can travel to their team house where they stay permanently. Now, funnily enough, because the West hasn't been able to establish similar routes, instead it's a global phenomenon. It's a brand and it goes from place to place to place, sometimes not even the same places, sometimes going to entirely new places. All of these advantages are non-existent, or all of these components that could be built up and built upon and improved and set so that they become easier and easier over time are reset again and again. And the best companies are the ones that simply have the right blueprint to quickly build it back up again and get it as high a level as they can. There is no home base generally in the West. Sure, for LCS, you go to LA. At the moment for the Overwatch League, you go to LA. But you won't in the future. People are touting geolocation. How's geolocation going to work and succeed to the extent that Seoul Esports has worked when Seoul Esports is all of Korea stacked into one metropolis and they're not going anywhere else. They aren't putting most of their esports also in Busan, a big city otherwise. They aren't going to Gwangju or any of these other places. Instead, it's all in one place. Now, we haven't even built that up in LA properly for all of the big esports. We haven't built that up in London or Berlin. We have certain places with studios, but it hasn't gotten to the same level. So how we, without even having built the routes, going to instead go also to Cologne and go to Amsterdam and go to Paris and go to wherever, Edinburgh. I don't go to Edinburgh. I'll just give that as an example. Go to New York City. Go to Chicago. Go to Boston. How are we going to build all of these up? We haven't even built up one in the same way that Korean esports has been built up. And hence, you don't get the same advantages and you can't follow even vaguely the same path. You wouldn't want to do everything the same. Certain Korean cultural elements would prohibit that from necessarily working. You'd have to shape them to the culture and the people and the place that you're trying to set it up. But there are certainly lessons could be learned here. And specifically, when you consider the amount of money in Korean esports in the early 2000s is nothing, is dwarfed by what's in the League of Legends and Overwatch scenes that are taking place in LA. Why haven't we been able to get the same benefits, the same infrastructure built up, the same media base, the same level of players? Well, part of it is because we haven't gained the advantages from all being in one place. And so Korean esports, it's a misnomer. It's Seoul Esports.
Welcome to Thorns and Thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't have any content. The man already speaks his mind, but I ain't gonna stop you now. I assume you saw a pretty fucking good video. Alright? And you're already on the man's channel. So stay a little while longer. I see you're comfortable. And just check a few more out.
This video was kindly supported by Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Landon Thompson, NateDOhDoubleG, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out as always to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Would you like to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you fancy a few teasers for what's coming up in my content? How about taking part in an esports discussion with me? Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.